I'm Chief Chris McNerney from the Greenburgh Police Department. I'm very pleased to be here tonight to talk a little bit about the police and court facility needs. I'm going to be followed by the Honorable Judge Bonnie Orden, who will talk a little bit specifically about the court needs. I'll start by speaking to a little bit of the history of the department. It was built and opened in 1958, and it was built to accommodate approximately 67 employees. That includes 63 sworn police officers and 4 non-sworn personnel. Today, we have almost double that amount of police officers, 115, and we have 40 non-sworn personnel. And most of those non-sworn personnel are EMS personnel, animal control, other services that we provide that we didn't provide in 1958. If you factor in the volunteers that we have, the volunteers include our youth camp personnel. They include our explorers. They include our interns. That would bump that number up to an additional 50. And also our auxiliary police officers, one of the vital parts of our department, volunteer auxiliary police officers, adds another 13. It brings that number up to over triple the amount of employees that that building was designed to accommodate. Another issue that we have related to the facility is a number of vehicles. In 1958, we had 12 vehicles. Today, it's over 100 now. So there is a formula that's was given to us by the experts in the field, the Center for Public Safety Research and Planning, that speaks to a correlation between staffing levels and facility sizes. That formula is pretty simple. They recommend 350 square feet per sworn police officer and 300 square feet per non-sworn employee. So with today's standard, that would bring the recommendation to over 52,000 square feet. And as you can see, our current facility is at a little over 22,000 square feet. If you did the math, like I did, that 22,000 square foot number was just about right for 67 employees. I think it would be about 23,000. So it's still on par. It's a pretty accurate number. So how does this impact the public? People could say, well, it impacts the police. You know, they've been doing it for a while. Why can't they stay there? Well, it doesn't just impact the police. It impacts the public as well. If someone's a victim of a crime, a witness, or even a visitor, somebody who's filing a report, we can't segregate them from other people coming and going. So what does that mean? If somebody wants to file a report, the lobby has all different activity going on, whether it's witnesses of crime, victims of crime, defendants' families. So it's a challenge for us when we have a situation to segregate people in our building. Oftentimes, I've had to get called at home to say, can I use your lobby, Chief? We have nowhere to segregate some of the people here. So we find ourselves dispersed throughout the building just to try to keep people safe inside that building. Talking about safety and security, we're going to go a little bit about prisoner transports and prisoner movement within the building. It's a very big liability. I'm kind of restricted with what I can say as to not compromise anyone's safety, but very, very serious concerns with respect to prisoner movement. Vehicle impact. People come to the police department, they come to the court, there's a lack of parking. Anyone who has come there probably has experienced that. Parking on 119, opening a door into traffic, it's dangerous. I think in an earlier assessment of our facility, they recommended parking structure that could accommodate 350 cars, and that would be at a cost of over $10 million. The facility is deteriorating. It's over 60 years old, and we're trying to do the best we can, but between the roof, the HVAC, the electrical system, our infrastructure with our IT needs that have exploded in the last 10 years, we just don't have the space. So I mentioned before, a victim will make a report if they come into headquarters, or anyone who needs to file a report. As you can see, they'll do that on the left. That's the makeup of our lobby area. They have little or no privacy or confidentiality, and so when we need to interview someone on a sensitive matter, we will take them into another part of the building if that part of the building is available. But that's one of the challenges that we face. We have a partition separating somebody reporting an incident from somebody else who could be sitting in our lobby. Moving victims throughout our building. We're very limited with where we can bring people. We have a window that we have where we see our defendants, which you can see on the right there. That's our holding area. We have no choice but to bring people past that area. Now, you say, well, you could put a shade up, you could block the window. We can't, because the desk officer is on the other side and needs to view that prisoner. So we can't protect that privacy of that person walking by. We do have limited privacy in the detective division. We have one interview room that is sanctioned by the Office of Court Administration to interview minors and adults. It's shared. Both were approved by the Office of Court Administration, and only one interview room that meets the recommended standards of videotaping that's done today. So we have other legislation that's passed I'll talk to a little bit later about, but to interview minors, we have to segregate them from adults if we have them. Another challenge because we only have one room to do so. Trying to conduct multiple interviews is extremely challenging, and it often happens. We have witnesses, we have to impeach defendants, we have multiple defendants, we have to spread out throughout the building. They're on different sides. Often detectives have to communicate by cell phone because there's no phone in that room. It's dysfunctional and it's inefficient. And I mentioned before the victim confidentiality. We try to protect victims and victims' rights as much as possible, but it's a consistent challenge. Another big issue we have is the barriers for the disabled. The building is not ADA compliant. There's limited or no access to many parts of the facility. We have 2 elevators that do provide access that have consistently been out of service for the last 2 years. The elderly, disabled, they cannot get to our detective division. We have to bring the detective division to them in the lobby. So that means taking statements, printing out documents so they can sign, signing for evidence. Everything a detective would need to do in a detective division, we often have to bring downstairs for somebody that is special needs. As I mentioned before, there's no access to the detective division, our special victims unit, our special investigations unit, the administrative offices, which if people want to file a complaint, they want to see me. Somebody who is disabled or elderly cannot get in there. And our public meeting room is in the basement. Again, you have to traverse 2 flights of stairs to get there. We have 1 ADA-compliant bathroom. It's currently used as a female bathroom. That's out of 4 public bathrooms in the building, and there's no access directly from the lobby. So you'd have to come inside the building through the ramp that's attached to the elevator, and you'd have to go back outside from the lobby to get to the other portion of the building if you needed to do so with a wheelchair. So as I mentioned, these are some of the stairs that separate the different parts of the building. You have the main lobby, you have the wing to the special victims unit, special investigations unit, the administrative portion, and they're not accessible. And the biggest challenge is to the right. If anyone needs to get up to the detective division, which is often the case, they have to traverse 2 full flights of stairs. There's no elevator access to that level. Safety and security. The prisoner movement I mentioned, I can't stress it enough, but unfortunately I can't go into much detail. But it should be secured. Prisoners should not be out in the public. They should not be in the open when they're moving from our facility to the court or when they're moving from the transport vehicle that we use into the court. So a huge, huge risk for us that we take every time we move a prisoner. I mentioned before the victims and suspects are in view. I'll give a quick story. A domestic violence case. We had the suspect or defendant in our cell. He's yelling and screaming. Within earshot is our victim in the lobby. We just have, logistically, we can't rearrange that where they walk in. This victim had second thoughts. Oh, I hear my spouse, I have second thoughts, maybe I don't want to go through with this. So there's really no way to segregate people in our building. Mentioned a lack of parking. Route 119 is a hazard. As it is now, it's confusing. We talked to the state. They've come out with their surveyors. They're trying to improve that shoulder there. But for court overflow parking, any parking in excess of that little parking lot, it has to go on to 119. I believe Judge Orden may speak to that a little bit more. But it is a hazard. It's a hazard that we know of. When people come to the court, they often come through the police headquarters parking lot, through our official vehicles. There's no security for our vehicles. Now, we've heard stories. It's an emotional time when someone's arrested. Certainly, anti-police sentiment is very popular today, and having access to police-marked vehicles is something it's just not recommended in any law enforcement agency, and we have no controlled access to our vehicles. And that holds true for the judges and the court personnel. The judge gets out of her car, and she walks right in the front door, oftentimes amongst family of defendants, and she leaves court oftentimes with those family of defendants who, very emotional time. It's another risk that we face. Our lack of space, it impacts our vehicles and our value. Currently we have, I believe, between $3 and $4 million in specialized vehicles. And most of those vehicles were obtained through grants or surplus programs. We also have our ambulances. Ambulances are very expensive. They can range from $150,000 to over $200,000. Those ambulances are out exposed to the elements. We have other vehicles that are inside. A 2001 crime scene truck. It's in pristine condition. It's 18 years old and in pristine condition. Why? Because it's been out of the elements. So these depreciating assets, that depreciation just starts to accelerate when they're outside. We're getting less useful life out of them. And our emergency vehicles, I'll show a picture of our ambulances. Our ambulances are to the left. They need to be charged to maintain temperature, for equipment and inventory that are in those ambulances. Other equipment needs to remain charged, heart monitors, et cetera. So they need to be plugged in at all times. They're outside. They're plugged in front of our garages. The garage there has the crime scene truck inside of it and some other vehicles. So we have no space to help preserve those. You see our top right picture, that's our mobile command. That's a $250,000 vehicle. That vehicle is in pristine condition. It's again, at least 15 years old, but it's been stored indoors down at the town garage. If we need it, there's going to be a delay getting it, but it's in good condition because it's been stored inside. One of the big issues we have with our current facility are our hands are tied when it comes to expanding. We can no longer go put additions on. The facility's built on bedrock. We can't go up. The building has, structurally, it would have to be reinforced to go on top of our existing building. So we can't expand the locker room for our female employees, our female uniformed employees. We're at our maximum right now with the locker rooms. They're really, really challenging condition. But we have a duty to hire the most qualified personnel. We're committed to doing that. At the current time, we cannot hire an additional uniformed female because we do not have locker room space for a female. So we talk about lack of locker space. The lockers are packed in, and you say, hey, all right, so the police officers are packed in. They have to put their equipment in there. We ask officers, we have Officer Albano, Officer Maid in the back. If you take a look at their duty rigs, we are requiring our officers to carry more equipment now. Less than lethal, you see a taser, you see other less than lethal tourniquets, quick clot blood agents, if something emergencies, Narcan. They have to carry a lot of equipment other than the traditional equipment that you normally see with radios and handcuffs and weapons, et cetera. They need to store those. And if you have a locker where the lockers are 8 inches wide, we have such a challenge storing that, any other bulletproof vest. It's summertime, the officers come in, and this goes for both male and female, they come in from their tour of duty, sweaty. They have to put those uniforms in that 8-inch locker. They don't get to ventilate, they don't get to air out, that includes the vest. Now you may not think it's a big deal, but next time you have some contact with a Greenburgh police officer, if you get a pungent smell, please, it's not their fault. Yeah. So it's a practical issue. Training. Training is a constant chore for every police department. We are training year-round. We do not have the facility to train. We have one room that it's similar to a small classroom where we can do some of that training, but we are constantly going outside the police department to meet our training needs because we just do not have the facility. Break areas, our break areas shared sometimes with the court when they need to sequester jurors, they need to use another facility, they use our break room. So the building, I spoke a little bit about it, it's just deteriorating. There's roof leaks, we've invested some money, the town has invested money in trying to repair the roof. It's a constant challenge. The most recent work was done It was completed, and we had a roof leak. And a very astute police supervisor who was at the desk saw a new leak coming in, and it was right above our $250,000 investment in body cameras. So if that supervisor didn't notice that and have the wherewithal to move a ceiling tile to redirect a leak, I'd be asking the town board for more money for body cameras, and it's a very expensive venture. It's a program that's been very successful for us, and it's another risk that we face with that building. As a police department, the facility is considered critical infrastructure, which means in the event of a natural disaster, we should be more reinforced than other buildings, because we have to answer those calls. When these natural disasters happen, we have to respond. Our building is not seismic rated, and it's required to be. The HVAC and boiler, similar to any aging facility, constant challenges. We're constantly replacing units, can't get them to work right. It's a constant challenge. The electrical service, the experts tell us, the service that's coming into the building, it's really not suited to handle the demands today. The emergency generator during one of the natural disasters, I believe it was Hurricane Irene, we were on generator power, we lost electrical power, we lost our generator. So we had to have generators brought in by Con Edison with wires. There was a downtime. That affects the public. Our ability to answer calls, respond to calls, communicate with each other, all of that went down because we lost that power. The repair on that generator, they said, you need a new generator. This generator is from the 1960s, and when they repaired it, they said the motor on that generator is the equivalent to a 1968 Oldsmobile engine. So we can't get parts for it anymore. It's in need of replacement. Our retaining wall along our parking lot, we border the pond. Those of you who are familiar with the facility, you know that there's a pond next to our headquarters, separates us from the R.J. Bailey School. The pond retaining wall is collapsing. We have vehicles that have been in our impound yard that are actually receding with that. It's a $250,000 repair, as well as the HVAC and boiler. I think that was estimated to be almost a $250,000 repair. The elevator, I mentioned before, consistently out of service. The experts tell us, at least one company said you need to replace the elevator. Masonry, thanks to Commissioner Carosi and the DPW crew, we're trying to address these hazards. We're, again, putting money in to address broken sidewalks, curbing, blacktop, but a consistent challenge. We find ourselves constantly chasing our tail to try to get that done. Asbestos, since I've been there for 25 years, we've had 2 asbestos mitigation projects. During the last one, they said, you have an asbestos issue behind your cells. We don't want to disturb it. It's contained. It would be a tremendous project to take out your cells to address that so it's contained, but you're limited to what you can do in there. So when I mentioned before, the desk officer had to watch a prisoner, we can't put another camera back there. We can't disturb that wall. So that's one of the challenges. Interview rooms, DCJS standards now, they don't want the police department to only have one camera on a defendant. We should have cameras on the police officers so there's no coercion that can be alleged. We want it on the whole room to make sure the room is neutral and not coercive. We can't break into some of those rooms because of our challenges. So we have no space available in other parts for an interview room as well. In 2018, the New York State legislature raised the age of criminality from 16 to 17, and they created a whole new classification of offender. So you had a juvenile, you had an adult offender, now we have an adolescent offender. That adolescent offender has to be segregated from both the juvenile offender and from an adult offender. We don't have the ability to segregate the new classification. So we believe it's time to act. We face a risk every day. We have a risk because there's no space to hire a female police officer. We have a risk of the safety and security of prisoner movement. We have a risk when it comes to safety for the lack of parking, and the people are forced to park on Route 119. We have a risk with the open access to our fleet. We have a risk with access to the judges and personal vehicles. We have a risk because we have no access for the disabled. We have a risk where we can't segregate victims, witnesses, and defendants' families. We have a risk, we're constantly facing physical deterioration. We have a risk because we have a lack of space to store our equipment. We believe it's time Our job is to minimize the risk. And in our current state, we're contributing to the risk. We're the police. That's our duty, to minimize risk. We're aware of the risks, and if something happens, we will pay. And I think that's all of us will pay. So it's my position we cannot afford to ignore this critical infrastructure any longer. This is a project that I believe every resident should support. The process, we are committed to being open and transparent, and we are looking for participation. There will be committees. We will look for involvement. We want to engage the public. We're open for questions. We're open for tours. I have female police officers in the back of the room. If anyone wants to talk about the challenges they face every day, they're here to answer those questions. And on behalf of the police department, I just want to thank you all for listening. And now I'll turn it over to Judge Orden.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bonnie Orden, and I'm here speaking on behalf of all three judges, Judge Dolores Brathwaite, Judge Christy DeLesio, and myself. And I'm going to present to you what I think are the critical issues that face the court, some of which were mentioned by the chief. Our priorities as judges of the court is to ensure fairness for every single participant who enters our courthouse. And every human who enters our courthouse is deserving of dignity and deserving of more than that which they are currently getting. And because of the physical constructs of the courthouse right now, it's impeding our ability to administer justice fairly. So I'd like to begin and talk to you about the Greenburgh Courthouse. It was built in 1968. A trailer was added in 2007, and that was helpful, but we are severely limited for space. One of the important issues facing us is that we only have one courtroom for all proceedings. And the reason that really affects the fair administration of justice is because we set aside specific jury weeks to have trials, and we don't usually we hear hundreds of cases in a week. We have to eliminate the court calendars, push back times that cases are heard, and as I'm sure you've all heard the expression, justice delayed is justice denied. And if on a Monday morning a defendant decides to plead guilty, we are sitting idle. And without a second room in order to handle the usual cases that we hear, from criminal cases, vehicle and traffic, landlord-tenant, town ordinances, and myriad of other things, we lose precious and needed time. So we are in need of another courtroom. Also, the building is non-compliant for as far as ADA compliance is concerned, not just, I'm going to show you pictures later about the bathrooms, but we don't have a witness box that's ADA compliant. We don't have a jury box that's ADA compliant. It is difficult for those that do have mobility issues to even enter the courthouse, which I'll show you. I also believe that the constitutional rights of defendants who appear before us are being compromised by some of these impediments, and I'll go into that. There are no meeting rooms between defense lawyers and their clients, which also impedes the ability to administer justice fairly. Security issues, I'm not going to speak that much about. The chief alluded to them, but clearly I'm not going to exacerbate an already poor environment for the judges in particular. And I would just say that this building does not meet our current needs, and it will not meet our future needs. Focusing now on the rights of the accused. There is no private area for attorneys to consult with clients. We have one small lobby, and in that small lobby, that's where defendants meet with their lawyers. There's no private room. You can have a defendant and his or her counsel, and a co-defendant and his or her counsel. And sometimes those are competing interests that are taking place. Witnesses, victims, they're all standing in the same lobby. Let me give you, here you can see a picture on the left. There's a lawyer speaking to a client in this small lobby room, others congregating. It's just, it's so unfair that I think that the confidentiality, attorney-client privilege, which is a fundamental right, is being compromised every single day. On the right, you can see people lining up to meet with the town attorney on vehicle and traffic cases, and the town attorney is actually standing where that gentleman is standing in the left-hand corner on the photo in the left. Here, this is an issue as well. There is no privacy, and when somebody comes with a vehicle and traffic, let's say, case, it's somebody who perhaps, maybe there's a gentleman who hasn't gotten a ticket in the last 30 years or has a perfect driving record, they're made one offer. The person behind them may hear that offer, and they're actually charged with the same violation, but they have a laundry list of violations on their driver's record. Should he or she be given the same offer? I think not. But because of the close quarters, they're asking that town attorney, why did that person get it and I didn't? Because there's no private place to meet. This lobby is the lobby for the criminal defendants, for their lawyers, for the victims, for the witnesses. It is an, it impacts justice. I'm going to go back and discuss the failure to have a room also impacts the ability of criminal defense lawyers to review audio tapes, videotapes with their clients. We don't have the facility to do that. Where can they review it? Some criminal defendants actually don't have the money to even travel to an attorney's office. They need to meet with their lawyers in that courtroom, and they need to have a private place in order to do that. With the advent of the body cams and the use of that, the videotaping, as was alluded to, of all the defendant's statements, audio tapes of 911 calls, etc., there's zero office space to do this. This impedes our mission of justice. In addition, because of the small quarters, you see that defendants can be approached by victims and victims' families or complainants, and vice versa. This is not something that should be taking place. In terms of the transportation of prisoners on days that are dedicated for incarcerated prisoners, certain prisoners are brought in through the back into the cells right off of the courtroom, but there are windows there, so they're on full display to everyone in the courtroom. And that's just not a good thing. But moreover, when we have civil matters that are taking place, and the courtroom is filled with people, and defendants may be arrested, incarcerated, or they're brought in for arraignments, they're paraded in that lobby that I just showed you, that busy lobby, and then through the courthouse, and then brought into a rear area where there are cells. It's not fair, it's not right, there are no dedicated sally ports, and we're unable to do anything as far as putting people who don't deserve it on display. As far as the victim impacts,
Victim impacts, there's no private area for victims to meet with the prosecutor or the town attorneys. I talked about the compromise and the negotiations with the town attorney, but even with the prosecutor. There is contact with defendants and their families in the restrooms, in the public lobby, and entering the courthouse. Here's a picture I'm going to show you. There's a female bathroom on the left with one stall, the male bathroom on the right with one stall and a urinal. That's it. And what happens is that people make a point, unfortunately, of going into the bathroom at the same time. And that creates security risks, significant security risks. Also with, I'll show you one other photo, entering the courthouse. Here's a picture of the main entrance. Everyone enters in the same entrance and exits in the same entrance. Judges, jurors, witnesses, defendants, families. It is just, it's a problem and a catastrophic problem waiting to happen in my view. Minor age victims and sexual assault victims, we cannot protect their identities. We have no place to put them. There is no office. It's a very, very unfortunate situation. And what's the impact on court procedures? Well, 2 weeks ago, every judge has their own stories, but I can only speak to you about what happens in my courtroom. I finished a sexual assault trial. While the jury is sitting in the jury box, this sexual assault victim had to be escorted from the DA's office into the courtroom. It took over 5 minutes because we had no room to put that victim. And the jury sat in the jury box for 5 minutes waiting. It's ridiculous, so that this woman could be protected. And again, I mean, there are legal aspects with minor age victims as well. So the lack of privacy and having everybody wait in the public lobby areas is a problem. We also have an increasing, with an aging population, we have an increase in guardian ad litem cases, which primarily affect the elderly, where they are entitled to have somebody just representing their own interests. It may happen more in landlord-tenant cases, some elderly that may be suffering from dementia or other issues, and there's no private area for them to meet with their attorneys. That is a problem, and with an aging population, we're seeing more and more of these situations, which again affects the administration of justice. And I believe that victims have a right not to be fearful entering the courthouse, and right now they are. Excuse me. Juror impacts. There's no privacy during trial. Right now we have a one room that is contiguous to the courtroom. It's right next door. And first of all, when the juror is in that room, they can hear everything that's going on in the courtroom. Well, maybe there's evidence that's going to be suppressed, and the jury is never supposed to hear that. I keep saying, shh, shh, that's ridiculous. There's no way, very difficult to control that. That room, and I put jury room in quotes, because that one room is a jury room, it's a conference room, it's the lunch room, it's the break room, it is the only room. So when we have juries, no one can eat lunch anyplace other than their desk, or they're forced to leave the premises, meetings can't take place, and the administration of justice comes to a halt. Again, the contact that jurors have in the lobbies and the bathrooms affect the administration of justice. And jurors should not be put in that position. They should be free of taint, and the potential for appellate issues to occur, reversals to occur, is unfortunate. In addition, we have had situations when it's brought to my attention, for example, during a jury trial, try to segregate bathroom time by the members of the jury, then segregate the lawyers going out, the witnesses or victims and families, the defendants and families, and what happens is what I have a court officer who's basically on bathroom duty. That is ridiculous, and it's only because of the configuration of this courthouse. The trial I just concluded, the alternate juror who was not excused, once the jury goes in, the alternates have to say, because we don't know how long it's going to take for the jury to deliberate, and they may have to replace a juror. They had to stand in the hallway, in the lobby. The jury was out for a day and a half. It's ridiculous. They couldn't be present in the courtroom because other proceedings were going on, particularly with respect to this particular defendant. Excuse me. I'm almost wrapping up. In January of 2020, there are going to be drastic reforms to some of the criminal justice laws, and you may have heard about this. Basically, we're ending cash bail for many misdemeanors, other than certain, with certain exceptions, and it's going to be required that discovery is expedited. Discovery which takes place, that's when the DA has to show what they have against the defendant within 15 days of arraignment. They will have to produce the audio tapes, the videotapes, any police documents, any statements of witnesses that they intend to introduce into evidence. And in addition, defense attorneys are going to be required to do the same thing and turn it over to the prosecution. Well, the reason for this is because defendants were taking pleas when they did not know the strength or relative weakness of the prosecution's case. So now, as opposed to having files that maybe we can currently store in the premises that may be 1 inch thick, they're going to be, at least a foot thick. And we have no place to store that. The court gets a copy of everything that is turned over to the other party. And this is to assist the defendant in making a decision about whether or not to take a plea. We anticipate that because of this, there'll be less pleas, there will be more hearings and trials, and we don't have the space for it. We have a 1 courtroom, and everything else stops when these hearings or trials are taking place. In addition, the court is going to have an affirmative obligation to reach out to every defendant, including on vehicle and traffic cases, to remind them of every court appearance date. We don't have the IT structure for this. We don't have the ability to do that right now with the current state of affairs in the courthouse. In addition, defendants will be meeting with pretrial services. Right now, pretrial services only meets with an incarcerated defendant, but they will be having to meet with non-incarcerated defendants to get their contact information so that those phone calls can be made. And in addition, if they fail to appear, the court will have an affirmative obligation to reach out to determine if their non-appearance is willful or was neglectful before we can issue a bench warrant. These are significant burdens that will be placed on the court, and we are not equipped to do that. So in the overview, I would just like to say that the infrastructure is deteriorating, as the chief was pointing out, in many, many respects. Safety concerns are of paramount concern to the members of the court. The judges, we work days, but we also work nights. And we are there nighttime to arraign any criminal defendant who is arrested. We work weekends. And when we come in, there's no other personnel there. We're alone. And as the chief was talking out, these are emotional times when families, defendants are arrested, or there's victims or witnesses, and there are times when people are waiting outside in the parking lot. And we have to sit and wait and look out the windows and try to peer and make sure that we feel safe. And if we don't, then we call next door, and thank goodness the police department is next door, and ask for a personal escort. So these are some of the issues that are facing the court. I believe that they are significant, and they above all impact our ability to administer justice in a fair way to everyone and give every person who enters the courtroom doors the dignity that they deserve. Thank you very much for listening.
Does any member of the town board want to ask the chief or one of the judges any questions? I just had a question for the chief. Is that okay? You know, right now there's a lot of technology advancements. You have, you know, drones, you know, cameras, and I'm sort of wondering, looking at the trends in terms of space needs, a lot of, you know, policing is going to be done maybe by robots rather than human beings. Will we, say 10 years from now or 20 years from now, need the same number of officers to do the job as we currently, you know, have? How is technology impacting the space needs? Because if we're going to be preparing a new court and a new police station, you know, shouldn't the technology be a factor?
Well, I think technology can't replace a police officer. But what I do think technology can help eliminate some of the paper that we deal with, some of the other equipment that we have, but certainly not a human body. But with that growth in technology, which we've seen over the last 10 years, it's exploded. We need the infrastructure to handle that. And we don't have the ability to handle what we expect to be our continued technology and its growth.
Maybe Victor, or you could also highlight, you know, one of the steps that we're taking in terms of the real estate, you know, firms that we're going to be.
Well, I think what we're doing tonight is phase one.
Right.
Tonight, we're talking about the conditions. We want to provide the public and our residents with information. The next step is going to be exploring our options. And I think that includes, Victor Carosi may be able to speak to it a little bit better than I, but it includes hiring a real estate firm to look at the options that are available. Do you want any more specifics in that? I think that basically we don't know a lot of what's going to happen, but this is the first phase.
Do you want to say anything, Victor?
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Just very, very brief. It's a multi-step process. I think right now we're in the education perspective. The idea right now, it's a multi-step process, and we're in the education process. We want to explain why we're beginning to walk down this roadway. The steps we'll be looking with an architectural firm to talk about how you might want to shape a potential new facility, what your space needs are, and how the different needs can form together so we can develop another idea. As the chief mentioned earlier in his proposal, a certain number of square feet per officer. Well, that's good, but that's the start, and we have to take that further. We have to understand what our budgets might be. That's why we wanted to talk to a real estate firm, what spaces might be available if we wanted to go down that street a little bit further, how those financial arrangements might be able to help the town, how we might be able to capitalize on properties that exist. So there's a lot of questions that we have, but we would like to, with the cooperation of the town board, is take this on a measured, slow, step-by-step process to make sure we are open, we are representative of what the community needs, and that this whole process is done in as much of a way that we can with the public to be a partnership if we choose to go forward.
No, you just turned it off.
There you go.
Okay. Hi. At this stage of the game, do you have any projected time frame for design and construction if it were a new building, the outside number?
At this stage, we do not.
Don't. Okay. Do you have any sense of the cost for the repairs, the infrastructure repairs that you would need on the old courthouse and police station? The elevators, if you can't make them last throughout this process, which really is a lengthy process, it's years.
Yes.
So you have elevators that are a problem. You have the boiler that's a problem, HVAC that's a problem. Do you have any projected cost? I guess that's Victor. Any sense of that? Because that is something that's throwing
Well,
bad money after bad.
I think if anybody reviews the past town capital budgets, we routinely invest back into the police department. And there have been, the chief mentioned a roof project. We recently spent capital monies to extensively replace almost one of the roofs there. We've replaced some of the HVAC systems. Every time we do one piece, another piece somewhere opens up. So it's a constant reinvestment. I can't say specifically standing here it's going to take X number of dollars. I can tell you that it's a constant flow of money into the infrastructure of the police department. We're trying to do as much work as we can with our in-house forces. It was mentioned earlier that we're doing some work in the parking lot right now. We're trying to do some repairs we can there. That's the highway department's been doing that work. Our maintenance department is doing what they can on the HVAC systems. But it's a multi-pronged approach, and we wouldn't abandon efforts to continue to fix what's there right now, because you have to keep reinvesting. I kind of look at it, the example is the Tappan Zee Bridge. A number of years ago, they had to go and spend hundreds of millions of dollars to replace the decking on a bridge that they were already designing to replace, but there's certain infrastructure you have to do. That's the way I still look at it with the police station. We still have to keep reinvesting it, but I don't have a specific dollars to tell you, but it's an ongoing issue, and what we're trying to do is balance that. For instance, mentioned a retaining wall. We're saying, can that last a little bit longer versus spending money somewhere else? So it's a game that we play in our house, in our offices with the engineers. What can we and what should we? And that's where we are. Thank you.
Does anybody from the public have any comments or questions? Actually, if you could come up and maybe fill out a card if you have questions, so we could call people up in the order of them questions. Yeah, but if you could come up.
Good evening. First, I'd like to thank the chief for such a thorough and detailed presentation. Thank you so much. My question is, Chief, you gave a very long list of many risks, and in your opinion, could you elaborate on which risk is the greatest risk for the public at large, and what strategy could be implemented in the interim until we actually construct or go through these phases of building the building? Please, thank you.
Excuse me, ma'am, for the record, ma'am, please state your name for the record.
My name is Dr. Pauline Mosley.
All right, well, thank you, Doctor. It's a very good question. Our job is to try to minimize risk as much as we can. To say that one risk is the greatest, it's a very difficult question. I can tell you that not being able to hire a female police officer is a great concern of mine. Having members of the public parking on Route 119 and being forced to open their cars and get out of their cars into a lane of traffic, it's very concerning. So it would be hard to rate them, but the risks are real, and we do try to mitigate them as much as possible. Some of the things, like as Commissioner Carosi alluded to, we know of hazards with our deteriorating facility. So we're trying to address those, minimize those hazards. They did work on the court steps. Those were a hazard. They put another handrail in there. They've patched up sidewalks and curbs in the police department. His crew spends a lot of time there, and we're very appreciative. We're trying to do the best we can, but our hands are tied on a lot of them.
Chief, how would we protect in the courthouse? Because there seem to be a number of safety issues there. Are there some ways to mitigate some of the problems that the court is currently facing?
Well, I know that they added, several years ago, they added court officer personnel. They call us up if there's a situation where they think that they need, if there's a security concern where they need more personnel or a security concern to be addressed. So right now, we're trying to do the best we can. But as far as security there, we have a metal detector, we have, officers there that can act. So we're doing the best we can with what we have.
We need to be clear that the town is not letting this building deteriorate for the purposes of getting a new building. That's certainly not happening. We do considerable investment in trying to maintain the building. That whole lobby area was added years ago in order to prolong the life of the building. We've just outlived the building, and the size of the police force has grown. And frankly, I just find it unconscionable that you could have the next highest rated officer, and that officer happened to be a female, and we would not be able to hire her. I mean, frankly, that's a lawsuit that's waiting to happen, and we need to address that. Now, whether it's trailers or whatever, but these are Band-Aids. And we've spent a considerable amount of money on the building. But as we heard from Councilwoman Hendricks, you like that? It's throwing good money after bad. And at some point, we have to just address the underlying problem, and it is that we have outlived the building. There are issues that the chief cannot tell the public because of issues of safety in the building itself. The same thing with Judge Ord regarding the courthouse that we would not want to discuss publicly. But frankly, it's outrageous. And it's not that the buildings are bad buildings, it's just not, they're just not suited for our population this day, this level of technology. The ballistics room, for example, it's inadequate. It shouldn't be used, frankly, in most cases. I mean, they've tried to retrofit it. They've done as good a job as they could do. But it really doesn't belong in the area where it is. And frankly, the wiring wouldn't meet any standard. The point I'm making here is that over time, we have done major construction on the building. We have done patchwork on the building. We've added elevator to accommodate those with disabilities. But at some point, elevators exhaust their useful life as well. And it's actually an exterior elevator, at least one of them. And so it's exposed to the weather, and it's, it has an age, and it has a life. And so something has to be done. And so even though an easy thing is to not address infrastructure, that's not the way this town board has acted. We continue to address infrastructure, and we keep bragging about our AAA bond rating. And one of the reasons we brag about it is because we address infrastructure at the same time. And that's unusual. But this just has to be addressed. And so as far as which one is the most egregious, it's figuring out, which is, the bishop is smiling. It's like, which is the most evil, It's all a problem, and it just has to be addressed.
I just had another follow-up question as a follow-up to your comments. You mentioned there's inadequate locker room space for female officers, which make it impossible to, hire new officers. If we basically all agree, to proceed with a new courthouse and police, headquarters, the probability, you're talking probably at least, 2 years before, before we would be moving in. is there a possibility that we could reach out to maybe design people or architects and come up with like a temporary either trailers, additional trailers, or action steps so we could start, at least temporarily, addressing some of these problems rather than have to just wait and do nothing. If there's a qualified female officer, I'd like to hire them, immediately rather than have an excuse, well, we can't do it because of the police. So is that something that the town board could consider? And, maybe Ellen, since you have a design background, you could maybe take a look at this and see if you could come up with recommendations of temporary action steps that we could take while we're proceeding with the long-term goals.
We've spoken internally about some of the things we can do. I don't think bringing in a temporary facility is feasible, but I think we have spoken about possibly converting one of our bathrooms to accommodate a couple lockers for females, a current female bathroom. We have 2 public female bathrooms. That would be an option. We're committed to hiring the best qualified candidate, so we do not want to pass up a qualified female.
But is there an action step that, we could basically commit to, so this way we could say, you know what, we're going to immediately take steps, so this way, if there's a qualified female officer, they are not going to be deprived of the opportunity of being hired, because we're going to take action as a town board now to make sure that they're seriously considered.
Yes, and we would come to you, myself and Commissioner Carosi, we would come to you, and if we need to try to convert a bathroom, like the existing female locker room was a converted bathroom, we would come to you and tell you we need, X, Y, and Z to make this happen.
But I think we're only discussing part of the issue, because we're not discussing the court at all, and all the issues that Judge Orden spoke about. And so how do we take care of some of the safety needs, or keeping defendants, away from victims and families and the kinds of things, or even jurors that are waiting?
This whole idea of converting bathrooms into locker rooms, that means you've taken away a bathroom, so that's not really a great solution to anything. And Councilwoman Hendricks just mentioned to me an interesting idea, perhaps, and tell me what you think of this, Chief, maybe expanding to the point where we move perhaps the court to a different building to allow the police department to expand into the court building. And is that feasible? I mean, would that...
I'd have to defer to the experts.
Can I expand upon that?
Sure.
I don't know if that's feasible to separate them, and that would only be a temporary solution because the physical infrastructure does not allow for so many things, even if you were to inhabit more of the building. But at least as a temporary measure until a new facility is built. It's just a thought.
Yeah. The female issue with lack of space, we spoke, there's a bathroom that can be reconfigured, and a separate door could be put in, and we could take away maybe one toilet. There's work to be done that could possibly do that, but it's patchwork.
There's some communities that have like satellite police headquarters. Do all the police, from a temporary standpoint, have to be working at the same building? Or, for example, would we be able to rent space for a division of the police department, and that would free up some extra space that we could use temporarily? It may not be as expensive, but at least there may be a division. It could be a detective division, or it could be the youth officer, or computer rooms, or something. Is that something that could work?
I think that's an option. With all of those, we do have other bigger areas, Nassau County, which has precincts, New York City has precincts. There are challenges for me as an administrator not being able to supervise as much with off premises locations, but it's an option. It
would be for a short period of time, while this is all going on.
Louise Jericho.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Louise Jericho, and I just want to support the police department and the chief and the judge. Everything they said is true, and I'm behind whatever fix they need. Several years ago, when my daughter was 10 years old, her father and I had to go to the police department because we felt that we needed to file a complaint on her behalf, that something may have happened with her and we needed an investigation started. And we sat for 3 hours in that lobby with the little sheet next to us. We had to give out all social security numbers, our name, medical history, how we're all related, my daughter's medical history, every detail of our lives. While a couple of times, like, my fellow community neighbors were coming in with the other business. Is everything okay? What's going on? And it was really, really horrific. It was a sad situation because we had no other choice but to put a minor information out with everybody coming in, the shift changes and everything. And there was no place. We were trying to whisper information and write it down, and it was very disheartening. But we had no choice but to put everything out there because that was the only place for us to talk. And that shouldn't happen. It had this turned into something where it had to go to court or anything like that. My whole community would have they knew by the time I got home where I was. So they would have already known that we went, we filed, and that would have put all of us at risk, our safety, my daughter's safety. So that's all I wanted to comment. So thank you.
One of the things we did in the court last year to free up some space in the conference room was to relocate some of the records off-site. I know that one of the projects that the court is working on is also to digitize those records, scan them, and that's a process. Is there any room to be freed up in the police department similarly, Chief?
We've done that. We have records. We had it. We've had our records at Westie's stored. We've had them at Town Hall. So we've had a lot of off-site storage as well. And we now try to digitize everything.
Okay.
But going back and some of those older reports, that's where there's work involved to try to catch up on some of those older files.
I'm just sort of wondering, I feel we have two issues. One is temporary and one is a permanent solution. The question that I have is, just so I know that we're really making progress, with both, if we wanted to look at, say, temporary, fixes that could free up, space, which could be other locations. There's a lot of buildings on 119, maybe even across from the police headquarters that are vacant. So the thing is, could we maybe start exploring or even have a team that will explore temporary fixes which could immediately help relieve some of the problems, and maybe get a report back to the town board, and we could at least say we looked at it and maybe it's not feasible, but if it's not feasible, at least we tried, and if it is feasible, it could make it better. Do you think we could do that like within the next month or so?
Sure. I think it's worth looking into, absolutely.
Great. Anybody else?
Yes. Don Sledge.
There's a portable.
While we're waiting for the cordless, Ross Fishman.
Good evening, Supervisor Feiner, Ms. Belleville, other members of the board. My name is Dr. Ross Fishman. My wife and I are residents of Hartsdale for the last 28 years. Listening to what came before me, I thought, wow, I thought I had problems. The thing that strikes me most at the moment is the conditions under which the judge and her colleagues have to deal. And we're talking about something 3 years down the line, which means none of those conditions are going to change for the next 3 years. Disgraceful is the only word for it. Well, I'm a volunteer member of the Police Community Advisory Commission. I've been a member for about 10 years, and for 2 of those years I had the privilege of serving as chairman. The commission was formed many years ago as an interface between residents of Greenburgh and the police department to discuss quality of life issues. It comprises about 14 members representing different areas of the community and high school student representatives. It's a forum in which each member has an opportunity to report what's going on in his or her area of the town and to inform Chief McNerney about those conditions and have him respond to those needs. Conversely, he takes the time not only to respond, but also to inform us of important activities of the department, including monthly statistics regarding criminal activities committed in the town. If you haven't been to one of those meetings, you have no idea what is going on in this town and what they have to contend with. About 8 years ago, I had the pleasure of receiving an unexpected invitation to tour the police department headquarters on Tarrytown Road. I was excited about that possibility because not everybody gets a chance to do that. And here I was now on the inside. And I was able to observe the behind-the-scenes operations of our police department. On that occasion, a small group of which I was a part was led through a dizzying maze of rooms, hallways, and stairwells, enabling us to see at first hand the deplorable conditions under which the men and women of the department must contend with on a daily basis. If it were in Playland, it might have looked like a funhouse with all the twists and turns. Unfortunately, it was more like a horror house, and the thought of being left there alone and having to find my way out was scary. Fast forward to 2 years ago, when I had a second chance, only to have the displeasure to find that conditions had deteriorated even further. A patchwork of rooms, inadequate space, as was noted 8 years earlier, the continuance of shared locker rooms, or lack of 2, for the men and women of the department. Now, if you will, contrast that with the annual awards memorial ceremony that I had the privilege of attending last week in this very room. I was overwhelmed by the accomplishments of the many officers recognized for their outstanding contributions to keep this community safe. Most residents have no idea about the risks that are taken and of the thoroughness of the efforts to catch the perpetrators who act to harm each of us and our neighbors. But it is not only about those who receive the awards, it's all about each member of the force who has to make a day-to-day decision for the benefit of our residents and for those who visit our town. I have to wonder how these officers maintain their morale, given that every day they go to work and they have to look forward to entering into these decrepit conditions. I don't know how they do it. They have flourished nevertheless due to the supportive leadership of Chief McNerney and the two previous chiefs I had come to know. They deserve better. They deserve a decent place in which to work, and they deserve the opportunity to operate even more efficiently than they manage to do now. I believe it is not too much to ask of all our residents to sacrifice a little and to gain so much by supporting the relocation of police headquarters and the court with which they interact. Again, it's sad to think that even if we started today, it would take years before those conditions would change. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
And now, Don Sledge.
Thank you. My name is Don Sledge. I'm a resident this year of 86 years in the town of Greenburgh. I was fortunate enough to be with the auxiliary police for a while in Greenburgh, which was a real thrill to me and it was a learning experience. And as far as the courthouse, the police department, and everything is concerned, one of the things I think of is that we should look around. Everybody on the town board knows Greenburgh and knows what facility that's vacant and maybe we could look into. Because spending a whole lot of money, we only go do it over and over again if we don't get it done right. And I want to say that I've been here under maybe 5 police chiefs. Chief McNerney was the last one, and I met him through his son. Tell you how age and old, young people and old age can get along, and that's how I met him. But he's a wonderful kid, and I always ask about him. And I think that what we should look at, you can do things over and over again to the same building, and you accomplish nothing. Now, the other question is, do the courthouse and the police department have to be in the same location? Now, what happens if we get the police in one location, the courthouse in another location, so they could have what they need? Because when you're comfortable with what you got, you do a better job, believe me. And like I say, I'm 86 years here in Greenburgh. A lot of you people wasn't even born when I came here. But anyway, we need to do something for our town, our Greenburgh, all right? So if you would think about it, the town and the powers that be, to get together and see what we can do about this to make it better and suitable for everyone, I'm quite sure all of us would be happy. Now, I have one other question I want to deal with. Is it all right if I deal with housing for 1 minute?
We're just really focusing right now just on the police.
All right. But I'll say again, please, this is very important. I know when I was with the auxiliary police department, and they said I was going to force them, they said Greenburgh volunteer policemen were one of the greatest in New York State. And that made me feel good. I still feel like Greenburgh is the best police department, not only in New York State, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, California, wherever you go, because we look out for you. Thank you very much.
So Judith, can I just respectfully inquire how many more speakers we have on this topic? Because I know we have some other business that we have to handle.
Yes. The last speaker is Sean Hagan, PBA President.
We're in suspense.
In suspense. Good evening. I'm Sean Hagan, the Greenburgh PBA President. I'm representing the 113 officers that work in the building right now. I want to congratulate Councilwoman Hendricks on your appointment, and I look forward to working with you and the rest of the board shortly. I want to thank the chief and the judge for putting together an excellent PowerPoint on the needs that we have in the police department and the courthouse. My main concern is the safety for all of our officers, as well as our victims, and again, the witnesses that are in the courthouse, in the police department. Moving them around in the police department, we do move them in separate rooms, but one of the things that we have to do with that is leave a police officer with them. We can't leave them in a room somewhere in the police department without somebody there. So you're taking manpower off the road just to cover them in the room, just to sit there. One of the things is the interview room up in the detective division is sanctioned, but it's also a room that has computers, printers, file cabinets. So, you may be interviewing somebody, which I've had the experience, and all of a sudden the printer goes off and somebody's printing something. It's kind of, it distracts not only the person you're interviewing, but, it kind of ruins the whole process, when they pay attention to what's coming out of the printer instead of speaking to you. It could disrupt the whole flow of things. Another area that, to me, is a high concern is the front desk of the police department. And as a sergeant, when I was sitting at the front desk, I felt very vulnerable for just being at the front desk, because when you're sitting at the front desk, people can see in at night, you can't see out. And you're just a sitting target there, if, God forbid, somebody wanted to do something. One of the other things we do, you bring the prisoners over to the court, and you have them in the back in the cells. God forbid we have a rainstorm. It's raining inside the cells as well as it is out there. And the HVAC is horrible in there, because you try to keep them happy. This way you're having a good day, but it's either too cold or too hot. You can't really keep the temperature right. Thank God we get good lunches from the diner. It keeps them a little happy. We don't have any coming now. Also, the parking lot. I mean, the parking lot to me is in the police department next to the courthouse. I mean, we have people walking around there constantly amongst our personal cars. And then the impound lot is there, and if someone's getting an impound release, them and some of their friends, they're in the back waiting, and there's other cars that are impounded. Some may be, held for evidentiary reasons, and there is cameras, but you still have the possibility of someone tampering with something back there or taking something. Also, the HVAC in the building. Some of the vents that we have black dust or something coming out of them, and it's disturbing. And I've been here for 21 years, and I know the past presidents and the PBA boards have been trying to rectify a lot of these conditions in the building. And there's a lot of patchwork going on, but it's not helping at all. The patchwork is good for so long, and then it starts deteriorating again. And as far as the locker rooms, I mean, the locker rooms, they're a joke. The chief said they're 8 inches wide. I put one pair of pants in there, and it's full. I hang one pair of pants. There's also bags that the officers carry. The officers are carrying a big tote bag, has all the equipment and stuff they need. They can't put them in a locker. You have to leave them outside. If you walk through our locker room, it also looks like an H&W shoe store. There's boots all over the place. And then you got guys, if you're coming in to change, and there's a guy in the same squad as you or a guy going out, you have to wait. If they're next to you or on the other side of you, you got to wait for them to finish changing so you can change. So, it's just, and, you try to keep the morale up, but this causes a lot of morale to be down, because the conditions in that building are they're just horrible. And as far as the court, I was a court officer for 7 years down in the Bronx. When I came up here, I mean, I fear for the judges, because I'm telling you now, if somebody really maybe I shouldn't say, but it's just, we try to protect them, and we will protect them. But something needs to be done to that whole building. All right, thank you.
Great. So we're going to, you have
I just wanted to emphasize, we have been talking a lot about the police department, and, the court is severely limited as well. I think Judge Orden was being charitable somewhat the way in which she described it. But it's not just the courtroom that the judges share. They share chambers. Until recently, they shared computers. One employee even has his office in a utility room beside a humming HVAC machine. I mean, it's a really critical, we're at a really critical point with this building, and I want the public to really understand how important it is that we move on this, and that we move on it quickly, because it's not just the public that's at risk and the police officers that are at risk. It's also the judges and the personnel that work alongside the judges and the police officers. So it's a really critical issue that we need to address, and I'm glad that we're on the road to addressing it.
Great, and thank you for your leadership on this, effort. And, I just want to emphasize to people that, we're going to make this a very transparent and open process. We'll keep the community informed of every action step that, we're taking. If people have questions, about the process or questions about the need or, how we're going about it, you could email the town board or, speak, and we'll address, your questions and, and respond, because ultimately, it really should be a partnership with the town board, the community, the police, and courthouse. And, at the end of the day, we want everybody to feel that we're doing something that's essential, and, we're just not building for the sake of building. We want to have real buy-in. So I would suggest that maybe within the next month, why don't we, follow up, and we could come up with a step 2, since this is part of the education. We'll try coming up with an outline as to the action steps we'll take and a timetable when we anticipate taking the steps. And also within the next month, maybe we could start looking at temporary action steps we could take, so it could, as a Band-Aid, alleviate some of the, the stresses and make the lives of everybody, better. So I really appreciate everybody's time and your participation. We also have a technology committee, and they're going to be reviewing some of the technology issues. So when we move, we could benefit from the committee's expertise and make sure that a building is going to be, 21st century or 22nd century, will be up to date as possible. So thank you very, very much.